Welcome back to the Chad Hasty Show on News Talk 95.1 FM and 790 AM. KFYO. Many national headlines to talk about. Yesterday, President Trump met with different governors, including Governor Greg Abbott. And among the issues discussed were different gun laws, policies, and proposals. And joining me to talk about just some of the president's proposals is Marc Lotter, former special assistant to the president and former press secretary to Vice President Mike Pence. And Marc, welcome to the show. Glad to have you here today.
No, thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Well, let's start off. Obviously, this has been in the headlines now, and the spotlight is on gun policy. The left will say gun control. I'm sure the White House has probably a different name for what they want to call this. What is the president's, as far as you know, what is the president's main proposal as of right now?
Well, the key that people need to understand is that the president is talking about bringing a broad approach to this issue, because there is no singular issue, despite what the left wants to say, that will make our children safer in our schools. We need to take a broad approach to these things. And so, as you saw last week when the president met with survivors, students, parents, and family members of some of the victims of the most recent school shooting and other past school shootings and concerned educators, the president wants to hear from all sides in terms of what we can do as a country to help protect our kids. And so he's talking about things like making sure that those who have some mental issues and may pose a threat to themselves or others, that we close those loopholes so the information can get into the system, so those folks cannot have access to weapons while they pose that threat to themselves or society. He's talking about common sense solutions to making sure that we can protect our children in our schools. We used armed security to protect our banks, our government buildings at the state, local, and federal level. We need to take common sense solutions to make sure that if someone does seek to do our students harm, that we have the people and resources in place to provide maximum security to our kids.
Marc, on the issue of having teachers who want to carry and who have gone through special training, I'm all for that. And here in West Texas, we've got quite a few school districts that have already allowed that to happen, where teachers can carry if they want to. Obviously, this is going to be a tough sell in the Northeast and in California and other places. What is the argument that liberals use against this, to say that this is a bad idea? Because I can't understand why allowing adults who you trust to care for your kids 8 hours a day, all of a sudden you can't trust them anymore if they're able to carry a gun. I don't understand that mentality.
Well, I mean, this is just, putting up more roadblocks, trying to push their gun control, anti-Second Amendment agenda through the national narrative. And the president's just not going to to reflex to that. And what he's talking about are, if we do have school teachers or administrators or other personnel that have the aptitude, the experience, the training to be able to provide another line of defense. In addition, in some cases, maybe we do need law enforcement. Many schools already have that. This is just providing another layer. As we saw happen and was so rightly pointed out, the coach in Parkland who gave his life trying to protect students, if he'd had his sidearm with him, this might have turned out much differently. There might have been a not as high number of folks who had lost their lives. But we have to also look at what is law enforcement doing. And that is also something that the president is looking at, because since the days of 9/11, the American people have been told, if you see something, say something. And it appears we might have missed the last step, which is government needs to do something.
Right.
And so we saw failures at the local level, the state level, and yes, the federal level, which the president has acknowledged. And we need to make sure that we close those loopholes, give our law enforcement agents at all levels who are doing great work, the overwhelming majority of the time, give them the tools that they need so we can go in and make sure that something like this, it doesn't happen again.
Visiting with Marc Lotter, former special assistant to the president, former press secretary to Vice President Mike Pence. I've heard this referred to as the listening phase, that President Trump is listening, taking all of this information in. What do you think the timeline is? I know people want Congress to act quickly. Congress never acts quickly on anything. So what is the timeline you think for the president to develop his own plan?
Well, I think, you're going to continue hearing out various sides. The president met with the governors yesterday, as you noted. He's meeting tomorrow with a bipartisan group of lawmakers in Washington, D.C. Congress is not here other than today, I believe, this week in Washington. But this is not something we can just rush through. And while there may be a strong desire for fast action, we need to make sure that we're taking a comprehensive look and we protect and honor the Second Amendment rights that were given to the American people from God and and embodied in the Constitution, that if we are going to take steps to protect ourselves, that we are taking the least restrictive and most effective way. The president said it shortly after the shooting a few weeks back, that we can't just act and do something quickly to make us feel good. We actually have to do something that's actually going to work.
And I agree. It doesn't need to be. We don't need to rush into anything, because that's when mistakes happen and you have unintended consequences that come out of that. I want to ask you about a quote yesterday that the president had about bump stocks, and I know this has been discussed by the president and others about banning bump stocks. And he said, "Quote: Bump stocks. We're writing that out. I'm writing that out myself. I don't care if Congress does it or not." That sounds a little bit to me like executive overreach, that the president's going to come in himself and with a stroke of a pen write out bump stocks, and those are going to be banned. Is that something the president, in your opinion, is seriously considering doing, or is this a technique to hopefully press Congress to do something as far as congressional action?
Well, the president has already signed an executive memo directing ATF and the Department of Justice to work on regulations that would, for lack of a better term, outlaw bump stocks, so we don't have to wait for a legislative fix. But this president, unlike the previous administration, is going to make sure that we are working within the guidelines of the law. And so if we can't find an administrative fix, then that's the time we're going to have to go to Congress to see if they can do that. If Congress wants to add that to their growing list of things that they're considering, that would be something that the president would welcome. But in many cases, the current federal law allows some discretion for the Department of Justice and ATF to work through these issues. And so you can be sure that the lawyers are working through that, and if we need legislative action, then we will. This is a president who believes in working through the guidelines of the Constitution. We don't just pass regulations and pass new laws via executive fiat like the Obama administration. So we're going to work through the legislation, work through the existing code, and if there is a way that the president can act, he will, and we'll work with Congress in a parallel track with that.
And let me ask you this, and I know we don't have legislation, written up, and we don't maybe have the full scope of what a ban would look like. But one thing that I hear, and I'm sure you've heard as well from gun sellers and different gun enthusiasts out there, is they're worried that a ban on bump stocks would include a ban on other items such as trigger modifications and other items that the left has said, hey, that increases the rate of fire. Those are just as bad as bump stocks. We need to get those out. What is your opinion on that? Do you think that the scope of what the president is looking at is going to be very limited and only 2 bump stocks?
I don't want to get too far ahead of the president, but what I would tell you is that this is the president who says what he means and then acts on it. And you're not going to get a sense where he is going to exceed what it is that we believe that we can do through the law. And what I would tell you is that in this specific case with the bump stocks, the president is going to direct and is directing the Department of Justice and ATF to deal with this specific issue. And And so, but he's also going to be very respectful because he respects Americans' rights to bear arms in the Second Amendment. And so that's not something he's going to sacrifice under a false guise of security. And so if this is an area we can act upon, it is fitting with what the legal system permits him to do, then that's how he's going to move forward.
Visiting with Marc Lotter, just a couple more questions for you before we let you go.
Sure.
And appreciate your time once again. When it comes to raising the age to 21 to buy a semi-automatic rifle, hearing reports this morning that the White House kind of backing away from that now. What are you hearing on that issue?
Well, it's a concept that the president has voiced, and there's still support for that. What we need to make sure, and what you have happening right now, is we've got to see how it would be implemented and what that might look like. And so that's very much where they are focused right now in terms of the discussion. And this is the place where we need to see the specific language, and we need to make sure that the language actually does what we say it's going to do. The president is very committed to supporting Americans' rights to bear arms. We have a tremendous heritage in this country from the days of our founding in terms of folks who are outdoor enthusiasts, folks who enjoy hunting, people who pass that legacy, pass that history from themselves to their children. And so, again, we're not going to overreact, reflexively react, and in an area where it could come to implementing an increase in the age where you can purchase this, we need to make sure that we are tailoring this to the most specific and narrow terms possible, and we don't prevent a father from passing a shotgun or a hunting rifle down to their son or providing one on their birthday, as they are gaining that appreciation and love for the outdoors and hunting, which is so vital to the fabric of our country.
Mark, before I let you go, you mentioned it earlier that the FBI, there were others who received tips. The Broward County Sheriff's Department, in my opinion, is an absolute disaster, and there needs to be investigations into that. What can the administration do to shore up security as far as the FBI and even local law enforcement goes? Because this, to me, seems like just a systematic failure of law enforcement on the FBI side and on the Broward County Sheriff's Department.
Well, and that's one of the reasons why you have the president looking so closely at the background check system, making sure that the information that needs to be in there that's provided by the states does get in there. You have some folks here in Washington who are looking at some of the so-called red flag laws that are in a variety of states where if someone is deemed to be, mentally facing mental issues where they might pose a threat to themselves or to others, that can be flagged for law enforcement. That can put them on a time frame where they would not be able to purchase a weapon, or in some cases, depending on the situation, that a weapon could be temporarily taken out of their custody, so they don't have the ability to cause themselves or other people harm. But we also have to make sure that we respect people's due process rights and their rights under our Constitution. So those are the kinds of things, in addition to securing our schools, in addition to looking at some of the other things. It's part of the broad concepts that the president has been exploring in the last couple of weeks. He'll continue exploring, talking with people, parents, educators, students, lawmakers from both sides of the aisle, to find out how we can move forward together as a nation.
Marc Lotter, appreciate your time today, and I know it's a big topic, it's a big discussion, big debate that people are having. So I appreciate you coming on and talking to us about where the White House is coming from this morning.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. That's Marc Lotter, former special assistant to President Trump, and former press secretary to Vice President Mike Pence, here on the Chad Hasty Show.